The workshop was convened to finalize a report for the United Nations Human Rights Council. There is a process called the Universal Periodic Review, where member states of the United Nations review each other's human rights records on a cycle of 3 to 4 years. So we started to get involved in this process in 2021 when Namibia was reviewed as part of the third cycle, the third time since this process started. So we, during that process, also submitted what is called a shadow report or an alternate report. So there are 3 reports that the UN Human Rights Council expects describing the state of human rights of each country. One is an official state report, which is normally prepared by the government, but also citizens and civil society can make inputs into that. But there are sometimes things that government maybe views too sensitive or controversial and so on, or where we have different opinions with government. And then there's also a space for churches and civil society and citizens to make alternate or shadow reports. And then the UN systems in each country also submits a report. So we convened churches, especially those under the Council of Churches in Namibia. In fact, this workshop was done in partnership with the Social Economic Justice Unit of the Council of Churches in Namibia. So we had civil society organizations, trade unions, farmers organizations. We also were having regional representatives, people from the Kunene, from Opuo, from Okakarara, from Varambat in the south, and so on. So it was a one-day workshop to consolidate this report and agree on what we are going to present to the UN Human Rights Council.
You touched a bit on the participants list as well. It was quite remarkable in terms of the civil society experts that you just mentioned. Now, what are some of the main, discussions of the workshop?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting lineup. We had the opening done by the Associate General Secretary of the Lutheran Church, Pastor Maureen Downsas, which provided the context and also the background. Then we had Dr. John Nakuta, a prominent human rights lawyer, which also talked about the state of human rights. Then we had the Ministry of Justice and Labor Relations that talked about the official report, how far they are, what is the process, and how civil society and citizens can participate in the preparation of the official report. Then we also had the Ombudsman's Office, because the Ombudsman's Office also has a role to play. They also provide alternate reports and also assist with the preparation of the state report. So it started off by looking at what are the issues we submitted in the last cycle. And to what extent have we achieved some of those things? So in the last cycle, we talked about the question of land reform, which is still unresolved. Unfortunately, we noted that the progress is still very slow. We've not done much in terms of implementation of the resolutions of the Second Land Conference, and this is certainly something that will come up again in this report. The other issue we looked at is the crisis in housing. Here we noted with much appreciation that there is progress. We have commended government for passing a new housing policy, which is very progressive, pro-poor. It's looking at the low income and the ultra low income. We also noted that the budget, which was normally around 50 million, has now risen to about 700 million. So those are positive aspects. The other issues we talked about is like the civil and political rights. We are making progress there, and because it's also enshrined in our constitution. But in terms of economic and social rights, we are really lacking behind. So we were in the last cycle talking about how best can we enforce? Do we need a constitutional amendment? How can we make sure that the socioeconomic rights are also enforced in terms of our constitutional provisions?
Now, Mr. Dempers, with the UN human rights report that you had been working on, how would you actually describe the human rights situation in Namibia since independence? What have we actually achieved?
Yeah, I think there is general consensus that in terms of civil and political rights, we've made progress. I mean, compared to some of our neighbors here and globally in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of the press, the free and fair elections. We have had relatively free and fair elections, stable transitions from one government to another one, and so on. So on that score, I think also in terms of ratings, in terms of media freedom and so on, we have scored quite well. Our main setback and worry is around the socioeconomic rights. We have shamefully not made much progress in terms of that.
What's the situation like there? What is currently?
I mean, if you look at the poverty situation, the reports say that almost 50% of the people are facing sort of multi-dimensional poverty. Then there's the housing crisis. 40% of people in urban areas, 40% of people are living in informal settlements without the mere basic services like sanitation and access to clean water and so on. We also are looking at the situation of unemployment, youth unemployment in particular. For me, like the urgent crisis is around hunger. In the reporting period that we are looking at, we had instances in the Omaheke and other places where children died of hunger. I think there was a 6 months period where there was talk about more than 50 children dying of hunger. So those are unfortunately areas that we have lagged behind. And although government says that the state coffers is sort of limited and so on, we feel that there could have been measures taken. We could have introduced our own internal austerity measures, cut out wasteful and fruitless expenditure, and strengthen anti-corruption measures. What we are hearing in the courts on the Fish Road case, on the so-called oil road case and so on, the millions of dollars that are unaccounted there could have been redirected to really alleviate poverty and give a dignified level of living to most Namibians. But because we have not strengthened our fight against corruption and not given the powers and the resources to Anti-Corruption Commission, to the Ombudsman and so on, we've unfortunately seen a lot of resources wasted and stolen by people that have benefited alone from this. Yeah.
I mean, I know that government largely needs to do their part in terms of social upliftment, fighting issues of hunger and unemployment, like you've just mentioned. Yeah. What is your organization doing to mobilize or to advocate for these kind of, these problems to be addressed in the first place? Yeah.
Well, we play a number of roles. One is, as generally as churches and civil society, we advocate for pro-poor policies. When there are bills or policies before Parliament, even before they go on Parliament, where there are spaces created and we demand for these spaces, we influence so that these policies can be pro-poor and can really benefit those on the margins of society, especially from an economic perspective. We also complement government services. In the past, we used to mobilize significant international donor support to complement government efforts in the health sector, in education, in others, natural resource management, and so on. That support from outside has been decreasing because with Namibia's classification as an upper middle income country and so on. So we rely on local resource mobilization. There is a few of the civil society organizations, NGOs and churches that gets some government support to do those complementary services. Others are not. We also do research work so that we can give evidence to policymakers that there needs to be an intervention done. We also model, development models that we think can work. For example, in the housing sector, the Shack Dwellers Federation has piloted a successful model, which we hope now with the new housing policy and the budget increase would be mobilized. That model would be scaled up and replicated throughout the country. So basic income grant, for example, we've modeled it. Government proposed a basic income grant through a government commission, was reluctant to implement it, and churches and civil society gathered and piloted that in Omitara, and the results speaks for themselves. It has been very successful. So those are the different kinds of roles that we play.
And now that you've successfully concluded this very important workshop, what are your overall expectations? Just want to add there also the UN Human Rights Report. When can we see that as well?
Yes. Yes, now this process started off with some regional consultations. So due to limited resources, we couldn't go to all the regions. So we were in the Kharas region, we were in towns like Lutherets, Aos, Petanie, Keetmanshoop. We also, according to statistics, some of the poorest regions in the countries in the Kavango East and West. So we also had consultations there. We also had one in Oshikoto and Tsumeb. So we are now going to consolidate all those inputs from the regions and from the workshop. We had some literature review, and by the 25th of this month, we must finalize a report. We received support from the Lutheran World Federation, and because they are accredited at the UN Human Rights Council, we'll be using that accreditation. So the government report is due in February 2026, so we have also agreed on an advocacy strategy on how to influence the state report that government is going to prepare. We are hoping next year, I think around May, around 4th or 6th of May, first week in May, Namibia will be on the agenda of the UN Human Rights Council. Government will have a delegation. We are hoping that from civil society, there will also be a significant delegation so that we can appear before the UN Human Rights Council and provide our inputs and perspectives. And once the UN Human Rights Council has concluded, they would come up with recommendations for the next 3-4 years for Namibia to implement, and we will come up with an advocacy plan to make sure that we hold the government accountable to the recommendations that they have accepted, but also assist where we can through research, the complementary services that we talked about, because we're not just criticizing, we're offering alternatives, we are providing complementary services. So this is what we will be doing to make sure that come after 3-4 years, we can see there's some progress that has been made with regards to the recommendations that has been implemented.